Welcome everyone to today's discussion on supply chain efficiency and its improvement. I'm honored to introduce our guest and partner, Mirko Senatore, a seasoned leader in supply chain domain. Thank you, Mirko, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Victoria. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I believe we can start by getting to know you better, Mirko. Could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, your experience in supply chain management?
Yeah, of course. I've been in supply chain management for probably around 20 years now. Effectively, I started my career as a consultant. Then I moved to Pfizer, where I spent around 15 years working there at the company. And then I left Pfizer a couple of years ago, and 1 year ago I launched my own consulting firm, which is called the World Practice, which I currently had. And I would say the bottom line is that I've been doing many different things supply chain wise throughout my career. So I've been working in more operational, more strategic roles, demand, logistics, customer service as well, different areas. So I've been having, let's say, the fortune of really witnessing and experiencing different parts of the true overall end-to-end supply chain, which is great, really.
Yeah, that's really true. Thank you for sharing your journey, Mirka. It's really fascinating to see how your experience, particularly in such global organization like Pfizer, has shaped the approach to the supply chain leadership and innovation in this direction. And actually, moving forward to our first question, I can say that supply chain efficiency is a term that we hear often, but it means something different to everyone. So that is Mirko. How do you define it, and why do you think it's critical focus for the businesses today?
I mean, honestly, it's always complicated to give definitions that relate to supply chain. I mean, there is always, I would say, margin for interpretation of things, right? Is that if we talk about supply chain efficiency, if we talk about supply chain in general, I mean, what is supply chain? Supply chain is really like delivering uh, the right product to the right patient, sorry, to the right client at the right time, in the right amount, with the right level of quality, etc., etc., etc. And the thing is that when we talk about efficiency, is also about like doing this in the most probably cost-effective manner. So doing it in a way that is as inexpensive as possible without
Mhm.
compromising any of these attributes. So, like the quality of the service, the quality of the product, think about perishable products, for example, where you need to guarantee your temperature. So this is really, what supply chain efficiency in a nutshell is all about. So it's really like accomplishing supply chain mission in the most cost-effective way. And you were asking, why it is important for business today. It is important because, I mean, it's always been important in a way. Now it's simply a little bit more visible than it used to be before. But I would say it is important because effective supply chain is a cost element. So if we talk about efficiency, we need to take into account the fact that supply chain is a cost element, an important one. It affects the bottom line of any company. So realistically, that's something that has an implication on the overall financial fortunes of the organization. And it is true that sometimes it can be marginal. That really depends on the industry. That really depends on the margins in the specific industry. But in some cases, it may be very significant. If you think about retail, FMCG, where the margins are particularly shrunk, well, in those cases, obviously, you want to make sure that you keep your supply chain costs at bay. Because on the one side, again, it might represent a significant advantage to keep it down. On the other side, it is also true that if you don't manage properly your supply chain, there is a risk that the costs might explode, and that's something
Yeah.
that you really don't want.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Actually, completely agree with you, Mirka. And I really understand like this kind of delicate balance between the operational precision and the cost effectiveness is like the core in this balance. And that is why it's really critical, I believe, like the never in today's competitive market. Yeah, so totally agree with you. And moving forward, more speaking about the metrics. Metrics are like the backbone in the evaluating the supply chain performance. So that is why, Mirka, could you please share your perspective on the most valuable indicators for tracking cost efficiency and speed improvements?
Well, traditionally you would use pretty standard metrics, and you think about OTIF, no, the on time in full metric, when very, very typical. You would look from a cost perspective at budget consistency. So you know how on target you are with your budget expenses, or you would look at the overall lead time. That is generally also, you know, something that is known in the beginning, so you just check that effectively that was maintained, that was respected. But the point is that as we progress over the years, you know, new models emerged, more sophisticated models. You think about, for example, cost to serve. Okay, it's a very important model, and you know, again, one of those things that you say cost to serve, and different people understand different things. but but the point is that these more sophisticated models are not always fully deployed, fully utilized, because they require a lot of effort. They, you know, they really require a lot of alignment, especially at the beginning. So the implementation effort is so high that in some cases it's not perceived as worthwhile, as worth doing, because it's just like there isn't a perception that the benefits outweigh the it's the efforts and costs required to implement them. But yeah, I mean, typically different companies would tend to use different metrics, but generally speaking, it's supply chain. You got a pretty standard set of metrics that you could use to measure, you know, cost. So efficiency, you know, the other side, the flip side of the coin, and of course speed.
Yeah. I agree. And actually, like there are lots of these metrics, but I believe each company decides what would be like the most suitable for them to track. Yeah, that's for sure. And moving forward, so striking like the right balance between the cost, speed, and quality is like really not an easy task. And what strategies you have found like the most effective in achieving this balance? Maybe you can share some example.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it is clear that because today we got so many digital tools compared to what used to be in the past, and you know, we got many possibilities, many opportunities of doing this differently. So I'm thinking about you know, um, pick a digital twin model. Okay, so digital twins and artificial intelligence together, I mean, they allow you to do dynamic routes and scenario planning. So it's quite interesting because, you know, you could see dynamically in real time, without taking specific risks,
Yeah,
exactly, you know, what kind of results you can obtain doing, you know, like one routing instead of another routing, and so on and so forth. And you can do this like an infinite number of times. It doesn't really make any difference on your costs. So it's good. But I think at the same time, it is important that we also like sometimes go back to the basics, and you know, take into account that certain, so like basic elements that exist in the supply chain management are still there, are still important. So if I think about, I don't know, a center of gravity analysis for, you know, logistics placement of the warehouses, for example, okay, or if I think about I don't know, a logistics optimization effort, I think, you know, those are all examples of situations and approaches where digital tools can come extremely handy, but at the same time, you know, you need to take into account that they still require a significant input, like human input. So that is why also when we talk about, you know, strategies for logistics optimization, supply chain optimization. I think, one of the very important strategies that there we need to take into account is like a proper recruitment strategies, talent acquisition and retention strategy, because ultimately the relevance of people running supply chains is still there, still as important as it used to be before. Skills might have changed in the meantime, but people who work and move the levers of the supply chain are just very, very important.
Yeah. Actually, agree with you, Mirka. And you were mentioning like digital twins and artificial intelligence. This sound like really game changers in the optimization of this landscape. And yet, as you pointed out, like blending these innovations with like foundational practices is key really to the sustainable success, I believe. Yeah. And
Totally.
yeah, thank you. And speaking about the technology that we were like mentioning, technology usually right now is reshaping the industries across the world, and supply chain is no exception to this. In your experience, how have the advancements in AI, IoT, or automation transformed supply chain processes?
I mean, they basically all contributed towards the same objective, which is effectively increasing the level of visibility in supply chains, because that has been traditionally the pain point, like one of the biggest and hardest nuts to crack in supply chain. So, of course, artificial intelligence, IoT, a lot of that really have to increase that level of visibility, that end-to-end visibility, and this is something that obviously allows you to reach unprecedented levels of optimization, because realistically, once you know exactly what is going on, you can really like put your finger onto areas that require intervention, require adjustments. That's something that clearly, um, any digital tools that help creating a level of visibility is in turn going to help achieve greater level of efficiency, but also greater levels of resilience. I mean, that's also something that needs to be said. I mean, and clearly we have been talking a lot about resilience since COVID, effectively,
Yeah.
and still today we're talking about it. So the point is always the same. I mean, it's very difficult to control, to monitor, to adjust, and to optimize a process that you don't really understand, that you don't really see fully, that you can't really measure. So these tools, in my opinion, like the first thing they do is they help creating that level of visibility. And then, of course, you can build on those, because what happens is that with, for example, artificial intelligence, you can build on everything else an engine that is capable of taking certain specific decisions, of course, algorithmic decisions, so based on a set of rules, but taking them independently, so like allowing for continuous improvement, continuous optimization. But again, I think that the important point is that these digital tools allow really, really to increase level of visibility, and that's something that I think is still in progress. I mean, we are still working on that across different industries, really.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And then hence like end-to-end visibility you mentioned indeed transformative. And it feels like we are just like scratching the surface of what these technologies can achieve in the terms of resilience and optimization. Yeah. And speaking about optimization, like every organization faces like roadblocks in optimizing their supply chains. From your experience, what would you say are the most common challenges that the companies face?
I mean, for me, really, as a supply chain professional, one of the biggest frustrations sometimes was the fact that there are a lot of trade-offs to be made, because supply chain is all about trade-offs. It's really getting those trade-offs right, and sometimes because you have like a lot of internal customers as well as external customers, where let's focus on the internal customers, internal stakeholders. They have expectation, they have desires, they have wishes, and some of those might not necessarily be always realistic, which is interesting because as supply chain professional, it puts you in a very, very difficult position to be able and justify why you can't have deliveries 3 times a day and a very effective like cost position. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
so I mean I'm just kind of like stretching this to an extent, but the reality is that for us in supply chain, it's really natural to understand that there are different things that you need to balance out, and where you put on one side, you probably take a side on the other side, right? So that's something to be taken into account. But it's not always possible to or not always easy to make this clear to all the stakeholders involved, and that is something that sometimes creates frictions, sometimes creates frustration. So it's problematic. And that also, because we started from the consideration of what are the biggest challenges for companies. I mean, sometimes, because companies are made of people, effectively, sometimes that might slow down the, achievement of specific supply chain objectives. The other element is lack of visibility, and I think we just talked about it in the previous question. Visibility is absolutely crucial to make any sort of like ongoing adjustments, ongoing improvement, etc. But clearly, this lack of visibility sometimes is a bit of an obstacle, an hurdle to take a properly comprehensive approach. And last but not least, and I think probably many of us have been through this before. I mean, it's systematically the case. There's so much to do. There's like so
yeah,
many initiatives, so many things to do that sometimes the resources are simply not enough. I mean, you don't have enough people, you don't have enough capacity really to take on all of the optimization, initiatives that you want to take. So that is also another big challenge, because clearly that is something that obviously slows down the adoption of certain practices. It slows down the optimizations of certain processes in companies, and that might really represent a challenge.
yeah. I agree with you, Mirka, here. And those challenges that you highlighted, particularly the trade-offs and resource limitations, I believe they resonate with many companies around the world. And addressing them requires like both strategic planning and collaboration with other departments. Yeah, this is what, like, I believe the most important. And looking ahead, it's exciting to think about what's on the horizon. Yeah. Mirka, what trends or innovations do you believe will have like the most significant impact on supply chain efficiency in the coming years?
Victoria, I think the first thing to say is that sometimes we get so excited with new things that we forget what we have and how good are things we have. And the reason why I'm doing this is simply, and I'm pointing this out, is simply because I think many of the technologies that exist out there today are still not fully utilized. Okay, so like there's a lot of untapped potential into the existing technologies. I think, if we consider IoT, by example, IoT is very widely deployed and understood right now, but potentially there are areas of the business where IoT is not necessarily deployed to, and that might generate other opportunities. And of course, the queen or the king of all examples is artificial intelligence. Really, because artificial intelligence is still fairly new. I mean, I think we've been hearing about artificial intelligence so often
Yeah,
that it feels almost as if it's something that's been with us for many years. And the reality is that it's still fairly new. And while the concept of artificial intelligence was already present before it came to the greater market, I think when obviously OpenAI launched ChatGPT, that's when people really start to understand or trying to understand what artificial intelligence was, and that's also something that then gave the rise to a wider adoption across companies. But I mean, we are no way. I mean, in no way we are near a mass adoption of artificial intelligence and mass deployment or a full utilization of its potential. So that's something that really holds a lot of potential. So, in a nutshell, many of the existing technologies, I just gave a couple of examples, still have a lot of untapped potential, and that's exciting, because what you can do with the technology that you already know, it's quite fascinating. But also, I think the one thing that is really, in my mind, set to potentially make a huge difference is quantum computing. Excuse me. Quantum computing is really like the technology that could be a game changer, because quantum computing is it's a step change, really. I mean, it's like looking at computational power in a way that we never thought of before. So it's not about like quantum computing per se, thinking about quantum computing as a tool. Quantum computing is not a tool per se. I think quantum computing is completely new approach to the way we conceive computers and machines, and it might bring all of the existing technologies to an unparalleled level. Nothing that has ever been achieved before, because the computational power will be so huge that effectively, the amount of operations that can be performed will be massive. So this is not science fiction, by the way. There are already like important things that are happening in the quantum computing space. So I think it's something to really be taken into account, because it will make a difference. We talked at the beginning about logistics. I think I referenced logistics optimization before. The level of logistic optimization that you could do with I don't know, AI based quantum computing powered type of engine, it's something that it's probably like even hard to imagine and to describe today.
Yes. I totally agree with you here, and like quantum's computing's potential is truly exciting, and it's intriguing to think about how it might redefine the analytics and operations in the ways we can't fully guess yet. Yeah, that's true. And finally, for organizations that want to improve their supply chain operations, where should they begin? What key pieces of advice would you offer to ensure lasting success for them?
I think we can pretty much think about anything that we've been saying, and really consider some of the key takeaways. I think one first thing that really comes to my mind is getting the basics right. I mean, it's just like it seems pretty obvious, almost trivial to say, but the point is that again, we get sometimes so excited that we forget to go back to the basics and ensure that our processes are smooth. And when I say these, I also mean watch out. I mean, you can't do any digital improvement. You can do like you can possibly launch any digital tools effectively if your master data is not reconciled. If your master data is not set in order. And this is just one very good example of getting the basic rights, because having a proper master data set up, I mean, it is part of the basics, and yet it's something that very often is completely, let's say, misunderstood, or not properly set, if you know what I mean, for a number of reasons. So getting the basics right, totally important. That goes hand in hand with having the right set of skills, the right people in place within your supply chain organization. And then the other thing is, because we said that clearly very often there is a bit of an overload of initiatives and not enough resources to run them all. I think it's important to, I would say, eat one slice of the elephant at a time, right? So
Yeah.
what I mean by that is really like making sure that you don't get overwhelmed with too many things, but you focus. I mean, you have like a strategic path of transformation. So like midterm horizon of initiatives and things that you want to achieve, objectives that you want to do, and that you want to make and that you really go step by step, initiative by initiative, taking into account that they're all part of the same journey. The other thing is, I've noticed this a few times during my career. Sometimes we do things, we adjust, we make improvements, and we're all happy, and we celebrate those successes. And then, 1 year down the line, you're back to square one. So what I'm trying to say is that it is, just as important as making improvements, making changes, is really making them sustainable over time. So sustainability of the initiative, sustainability of the results, and self-sustainability, I would say, of these results is absolutely important. And then, because we're talking about supply chain, yeah, it's natural for many of us supply chain professionals to consider a truly end-to-end approach, but in reality, there is always a little bit of a risk that certain initiatives might be really a little bit silent, and you definitely don't want that. So you don't want to work in silos. You really want to work in conjunction with all other supply chain functions, supply chain divisions, but also with all of the other departments or organizations within your own company. So making sure that really there is a true coordination. To give you an example, remember that any supply chain initiative, supply chain project that requires a business case, necessarily to be true and realistic, wants to be sustained by a business case that takes into account the effect overall on the company. Okay, and then the last bit of advice is really identifying the right partners, because this is a journey that is complicated. You can't possibly do this in isolation, and you need someone to really hold your hand, almost in a way, along the journey, to help you achieve those objectives. So again, initiatives are many, are multiple, and complex and complicated. You need resources, but also you need somebody who is qualified to help you walk that journey. So, like considering suppliers, providers, digital tools, or any tools that effectively might come from the outside, considering consultants who might help you along the way with implementation or even just design, etc., etc. All of these are things that require certain investments to be taken at the beginning, but for sure those are investments that pay dividends big time, really along the way. So definitely worthwhile investments. This is something that cannot be done in isolation, really. So having the right supporters and the right partners in place is totally critical. And that was really my last bit of advice.
Yeah, thank you, Mirko. Thank you for sharing like really valuable advices. And I believe like your advice to start with the basics is like the core, the timeless, and the most practical approach. And it's a reminder that success often lies in building strong foundation before pursuing any ambitious improvements you may come up in your mind. Yeah. Thank you, Mirko, for sharing your valuable insights and experience with us today. Your expertise in supply chain management and your vision for the future have given us much to reflect on. And I'm happy and hope that today's discussion to everyone who will be watching has inspired your ideas and approaching for tackling their supply chain challenges. So thank you once again, and look forward to seeing your continuous contributions in this field in the future, Mirko.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Victoria.